the challenges to our traditional lifestyles, some men and women have chosen to break with the established system and create a world which better suits them. I was curious to find out more about these unconventional lives and meet those for whom autonomous rhymes with joyous. After a long drive, I finally arrived in the eco-village of Riso, 20 miles south of Chateaubriant in the west of France. The community was founded by a couple who are widely considered to be among the pioneers of self-sufficiency, and today it houses several families from a variety of backgrounds and origins. I can't wait to find out what self-sufficiency within a collective looks like on a daily basis. The first thing I discover is that the village has 3 dwellings: a small earthen house, a yurt, and a bit further away, a large stone house, which would seem to date back to another era. The path leads instinctively towards this last dwelling, which is where the amazing story of this remarkable couple has played out since they first met. Patrick and Brigitte Baronet were both convinced that happiness could be found in a certain simplicity, and have turned their lives into an experiment in self-sufficiency.
So this is the solar water heater that I built 40 years ago, and which still works just fine. Those are the solar cells, which provide electricity, greenhouses, which provide heat. There's a heat bank in the greenhouse, which stores calories. A solar dryer at the other end of the greenhouse, which enables us to dry fruit. And then on the roof, you can see the wind turbine. There are 6 square meters of flexible solar cells there, another greenhouse there. We've got almost all we need. Since June 14th and 15th, 1997, in other words, just over 20 years ago, we've been completely self-sufficient in electricity. What is remarkable is that we have all the comforts that we need, what we call comforts anyway. We have lights, a vacuum cleaner, internet, television, a washing machine, and other appliances. We haven't deprived ourselves of anything.
I'm impressed by what Patrick tells and shows me. Their desire for independence drove them to completely rethink the whole system of traditional energy consumption. Both creative and visionary, they've drawn upon the knowledge gleaned from books and from people they've met along the way. Their philosophy could be summed up in a desire to get closer to the elements of nature and connect with its energy, which logically led to a rethinking of their water supply.
When we decided to become self-sufficient in water, we had this zone, a rather peculiar 80 square meter building. We built another house behind it. So in all, there's a water catchment area of 160 square meters. Rainwater runs down the tiles, drips into buckets all around the zone, and we collect the buckets and take them to the water tanks. What's more, the water is free of any bacteria because it's kept out of sunlight, and at a temperature of 12 degrees, bacteria only spreads at 17 degrees. So this is excellent drinking water. We haven't spent a penny on water for 40 years or a penny on electricity for 20 years. What we eat is also central. We're interested in our health above all, and so we eat very little meat, at least only occasionally. We're 80% self-sufficient in vegetables. We still have to buy things like oil, dried fruit, and cereals. And every so often we treat ourselves. I'm not a wine grower, but I do like wine, so we buy our wine.
Whether it's energy, water, or food, self-sufficiency is a daily reality for Brigitte and Patrick. I'm pleasantly surprised not just by their welcoming house, but by the inspiring and exemplary way of life this extraordinary couple lead. Their commitment is touching, as is their deep desire, which started when they were still very young, to very simply be the change they wish to see in the world.
I was actually born in Paris, in the 14th district. We used to live just outside Paris in a cul-de-sac, not far from the forest of Clamart. And so I've always been very close to nature, close to the forest. In the street there was just the house with a garden at the back, and then a much bigger garden. It was quite a rural environment, and yet so close to Paris. In the 1960s, the forest road was renamed President Roosevelt Street. From that moment, my childhood disappeared because of the renaming. And from then on, there were endless lorries and cars, non-stop. All I could see were traffic jams and pollution. I could see it, but no one else could. We should have been worrying about these issues then. Well, at 14, 15, I was worrying about them. Then the events of 1968 came along with the slogan Métro Boulot Dodo, the rat race, which was a comment on modern life. As far as I was concerned, it was too intellectual, too facile. It was easy to go on demos, to hold up banners. It was easy to shout slogans, asking others to change things. I always believed that change had to start with me. I had to put my own house in order if I wanted to be true to my ideas.
We have no idea why we're on this earth. It's laid out for us. We follow a path, but we don't know where we're going. I can't say for me, in all honesty, that in '68 I could see this already. That wouldn't be true. But at the same time, I wanted to be in agreement with... Walking the walk for me is really essential. It's like what the Amerindians say. My words have to be in step with my actions. If you have ideas, then you need to put them into practice. If you have a vision, a dream, you need to live it in real life.
In 1968, I was 22 years old, and that's when I met Brigitte. We both said that if we wanted a better world, we had to start by living with less and sharing more. So we left Paris and bought a small house. We were supplied by the water company, the Lyonnaise des Eaux, for drinking water, for flushing the toilet. We had electricity too. But we soon realized that there was so much waste involved, and we were so dependent. So we decided to find an alternative way of doing things, and proving that we could do so much with so little. We saw the rise of the nuclear industry, for example, and we thought that this was extremely serious, and that you couldn't take chances with nuclear energy. We went on a demo in Nantes. In fact, we were at the head of the march with our children, and we came back home. We turned on the lights and realized that it didn't make sense. We were being inconsistent, so we decided that one day we'd be completely self-sufficient. This is what's left of the first turbine that we used for 20 years, one of the first turbines which provided energy for the house. This is the spindle. What's interesting is that for 20 years, this little generator provided all our electricity. The role of the turbine was to keep this turning in order to produce electricity. So if you plug this in, it becomes a motor. But conversely, if you make the motor turn, it's the motor which provides electricity. Amazingly, it's only as big as a bottle of water, and yet all our self-sufficiency came from this. Little by little, we've freed ourselves from the artificial needs that society imposes on us. And something became abundantly clear. We are human beings living on a planet which provides us with all we need in abundance: water, soil, air, wind, fire, sun, etc. We realized that natural elements had been turned into buyable commodities. So we decided not to buy into the system. Our aim was not to exploit, but to benefit from what nature provides, and to avoid artificial products as much as possible. In the end, it's about returning to a very simple life, and I don't really understand why more people don't do it. If the French were truly aware, things could really be changed. If people in the West who consume 10 times more than they should lived like us and cut their consumption by 10, the world would be such a different place.
We
are constantly thinking about what we ought to be hanging on to from traditional ways of life, whilst not rejecting modernity. For example, we use internet, and I've got a website which works very well and is extremely useful. We have a car as well, but that's as far as it goes. And in fact, we've managed to support a family of 4 children on just half a salary.
Beyond Patrick and Brigitte's desire to be free from a system, self-sufficiency has enabled them to live a life of sharing, simplicity, and solidarity. This philosophy is their guiding principle, and on which they brought up their children.
There were 4 of us, and it was hard for our parents, because 4 children need looking after. You could say that we were the guinea pigs in their experiment. At times it was amusing because we spent a lot of time dealing with pee and poop. We had litter trays for toilets, so I didn't really invite people round who weren't aware of... because, you know, we didn't have toilets. It was difficult to say to friends, we don't flush the toilet here, and tell them, here we do things differently, because we're in a whole process of awareness. I think it did make them think, but I hadn't come to terms with it. I would just say, oh, it's my parents. You have to deal with them. That's how it was for me. So I left home because I'd had enough of it, and I needed to find out things my own way. So I became a consumer and ate like everyone else. I needed to try things for myself, and when I started to have... it was when my body reacted with stomach aches and so on. I saw what others were eating, without looking what was in the food. They just weren't really aware. But for me, it was my body that told me to return to nature, to return to a simpler way of life.
You turned your life into a lab experiment, didn't you?
Completely. When a way of life appeals to you, and it seems possible to reproduce and it's consistent with what you want to pass on, and how you want to live, then you make the ideal work.
When we moved in here in 1976, our aim was to live according to our ideals. After 20 years, we realized that it was in fact possible, even though people had told us it wasn't. It's important to tell people that you can have an alternative lifestyle. Today, passing on this information has now become a key political act for us. We've realized that a huge amount of people are interested in it, and they come, first out of curiosity, out of a desire to make practical changes, and then eventually they realize that an inner upheaval has taken place. Some people are in tears when they leave here.
It's a beautiful and touching story of love and freedom that started when they were young. But it hasn't been without its pitfalls. It's been the strength of their belief which has enabled them to lead this self-sufficient life. Patrick and Brigitte are the undeniable living proof that it's possible to live differently. Over the years, they've had more than 50,000 people come to visit them in order to find answers to their questions. Tomorrow, the village is expecting another 20 curious visitors who are all keen to try out this self-sufficient way of life. I can't wait to spend a few days with them, listening to the residents of the community, adults and children alike, talk about their experiences. Some will be coming with the real intention of changing their lives, and some simply to learn a few practical tips. They're all prepared to learn from this amazing training center in self-sufficiency. The participants will be arriving first thing in the morning. Patrick's aim in this first talk is to provoke some strong reactions.
So, I want us to work together. What do you need to produce an egg? It's not even a case of something not seeming right, it's an absolute absurdity. I feel like we should go through it all together. It all starts in some mines in Uganda. Ore is extracted to make iron and then to make steel, which is then manufactured in order to construct power plants. So there's already a whole lot of energy, which is never taken into account, which is produced before we get to the nuclear plant. Then there's the chemical industry and the oil, which produces fertilizer, plastics and weed killers. Then chicken are reared in factories, battery farms, which is basically the same thing. Chickens suffer from both stress and illness brought about by injections and overpopulation. So, all that to produce an egg and leave us with manure that's completely contaminated. I think this is a good example of how things work. I felt aware of all this intuitively 25 years ago, and I thought that, personally, I didn't want any of it, didn't want to be involved in it. Here, just our kitchen waste and a few local grains are enough to feed chickens and produce a year's worth of eggs and of protein. The global solution would be to rediscover our self-sufficiency through natural elements above the soil in vegetation and organic substances. There we are.
Once the seeds of reflection have been sown, each participant will take part in a series of study groups and workshop sessions in how to take charge of their lives and become self-sufficient. As a first, gentle step, a taste awareness workshop, where they experience new flavors and eating habits which are both healthier and sourced locally. Here they're learning from Tara, one of the village's residents, who's showing them a new recipe for lasagna. What's the recipe today? A lasagna?
It's a plant-based lasagna. In other words, gluten-free. Instead of using sheets of pasta, we use cabbage and comfrey leaves. And for the cream sauce, to replace the bechamel, we make sauce from sunflower seeds that are produced locally.
More oil?
I think you should put in some of that, and some oil. So, today it was
vegetal lasagna with cabbage and comfrey leaves. Then the filling was quinoa, carrots, sweet corn, a few olives. And to replace the cream, we made a sauce from sunflower seeds. I work in business finance, so in an area that has very little, which doesn't really have a positive impact on the planet. But I'm in the process of moving to something completely different. It's the culmination of a journey which started several years ago, helping me to reconnect to what is really essential. It's about a whole search to take back control of our way of living, and self-sufficiency is a part of it, perhaps even the main part. It's the precondition of freedom.
You get a job thanks to 2 degrees, having worked 3 years instead of 2 to get a master's. So all in all, 6 years of studies. Then you become a manager, you're in charge of a team, and then you change firms every so often. And it just wasn't right for me. When you see all the misery in the world, I just couldn't carry on like that. I really wanted to change my life.
We're genuinely convinced that quality of life and simplicity go hand in hand. We've all had dinner parties and been outraged and shocked by what's going on around. But in the end, nothing changes. Everyone says that politicians are all the same, that they do nothing, and so on. It's easy to criticize, but in the end, what do we actually do? And that's when you realize that we do have the capacity to act. Everything is possible. Infinitely so.
For most of the visitors, coming to the eco-village is an important stage in the changing of their mindset towards reclaiming their lives. Autonomy in food, water, and energy, technical training, and reconnecting with the elements, going from one type of workshop to another, each participant expresses their desire to take their first steps on the path to self-sufficiency.
I know that all of that can seem complicated, but we do it anyway, because if we don't, I'm sorry to say, it'll be chaos. If we don't create an alternative way of life like this, a much more simple one, which consumes 10 times less energy on average, I really don't see how we're going to survive. So when you asked me about the curve continuing upwards, I said there was no solution. The only solution is to completely change our way of life. And even if we might seem crazy, real craziness would be to close our eyes.
Where there's a will, there's a way. This could well be the moral that sums up Patrick's experience.
So that's a sanitary block which is self-sufficient in hot and cold water and electricity.
Olivier is also motivated by curiosity and the eagerness to learn to do things himself. He's been a resident here for 5 years and arrived knowing absolutely nothing about energy. His desire for self-sufficiency has driven him to learn to do everything himself.
The idea behind a solar water heater is about capturing the sun's rays.
His experience has been so rich that it's enabled him in turn to teach others how to achieve energy self-sufficiency.
So with just these elements cobbled together, you get an output of more than 50%. That means that more than half of the energy captured is transformed into heating.
I'm 20.
20. And what are you getting out of this course?
I'm taking in a whole lot of things. Some of them made me cry because I realized that a project like this, I live in a town, and in a town, everyone says that none of this is possible. My parents want me to settle down and have financial security, but I told them no. And I've realized that this sort of thing is possible, and there are loads of people like me. So that encourages me and helps me to believe in my projects, and it's great.
I picked 3 like that today. Before building the greenhouse, I put in a watering system because that is what's most important. Here I've got a porous pipe going all the way down the middle, and here I've got some sprinklers. So I turn on the sprinklers, that one's open. I turn off this one, filling the puddle. And here I have a timer. It's not expensive, and it's important because if you forget to turn the water off at the end of the day and it runs all night, your self-sufficiency is going to suffer badly. Off it goes. The 2 sprinklers on the sides are going to water the 2 flower beds, and there's the microporous hose which supplies them. And it all works really well.
The whole greenhouse is full of lettuces. We're going to be able to extend their growth period and have lettuces all through winter. Then in the spring, we'll sow again in the greenhouse. So even if there's a cold snap, we've still got plants growing.
Here we have some beautiful carrots. I'm trying to sow some more. There we have runner beans and more lettuces here. And here we've got some spring onions. What you need to know is that what you eat will determine what you have in the garden, and the garden will determine what you eat. It works both ways. We were total novices when we were 30. We knew nothing about gardening. We muddled through. I'm tempted to say, work it out for yourselves. Some things will work, some things won't. You'll make mistakes. That's how it is. Use common sense and give it a go.
We're like robots. We get up in the morning, even if we don't feel like it, and go to work for 8 hours, and then rush back home to make dinner, and finally get some sleep, and so on. But we can't live off work. Our bodies function by eating and by sleeping. I don't want to be a part of all of that. I don't want to join the rat race. So the alternative is self-sufficiency. Learning how to do and to make really helps me to grow as a person. This is what life's about, real happiness.
The dish is purpose-built to heat the water very quickly, so if that's what you want to do, this works really well. You can put this pot here, leave it for 2 hours, come back and it'll be cooked. These small thermometers tell me how hot it gets, and I've never seen them go above 150 degrees centigrade. You can cook tarts here and cakes. You do the same thing. You put a lid on at the start, take it off after an hour so that the top gets cooked and then the steam escapes. You can cook everything in this. You nevertheless need to change the way you cook because you can't just wonder what you're going to eat an hour before lunch. You have to prepare things the night before or first thing in the morning. You have to peel the vegetables, prepare the pots. You put it all in first thing, and by midday, it's all done. It stayed warm because it's been heating for 2 hours. You can't burn anything because once the sun's moved, it no longer reflects on the oven.
I have a company and work as a consultant in energy saving for industry and shopping centres, so not exactly connected to nature. So when I come here, it throws up a lot of questions. Just the simple fact of returning to the land and using solar energy, for example, will lower energy consumption. It also helps to create networks for sharing and mutual aid, since by definition, manual labour takes time and needs a workforce. So working together with your neighbours is important too.
Taking time to reconnect with oneself and to the elements, sharing with and helping others to get the most out of the land and the sun. That's what it's about. Olivier's partner and fellow resident is Cécile. She aims to pass on to the group that getting the best from the land means learning to respect it and look after it.
So what can you make with burrage? Tea or what?
Well, you can put it along the rows of potatoes because it'll make the rows richer. We'll keep some, but there's plenty of it. Look, it's everywhere.
And can you eat the leaves?
You can eat the flowers, yes. We'll take them to the kitchens because you can put it in salads. And the baby leaves too. You'll see when you taste them, it's like eating shellfish. There's a real taste of the sea, a really salty taste.
Okay, let's just pull up the thistles and some of the weeds.
Just getting rid of the thistles will be great. Brigitte will stop having nightmares about them. Oh, that's great, really great. That's brilliant, fantastic. It is wonderful.
Wonderful.
C'est super sympa, un jardin. C'est quoi ça pour une bête? Faut être un coup comme ça.
Ouais, nous, on voit bien que...
It's clear that when one person does a little bit, you don't really notice the difference. It's minimal.
Quand on vient tous...
But when we all work together the whole afternoon, it's fantastic. What's more, we've created bonds by working together. That's what's nice. It's going to show in the garden too. Okay, so if I'm not mistaken, this is chamomile metrichiara, which is very good for treating conjunctivitis. You just make a chamomile infusion, and then with a little eyedropper, you can put some in your eye if you've got an infection. It's really effective. It helps with all sorts of allergies too. We have all kinds of treatments, but in most of the cases, 80% are natural treatments. So firstly, we'll use plants and then vegetables. Some are a bit strange. I know that when my son had an ear infection, Brigitte put onion in his ear, covered it in clay, and in 3 days it was gone. It was great.
Ow! What are you doing?
I'm making a clay poultice.
I wasn't stuck there.
I'm going to put it all around the swollen area.
Cécile and Olivier wanted a simpler life for their children, closer to nature. So they came to live in the eco-village, alongside Brigitte and Patrick nearly 5 years ago. Living in this comfortable yurt, their life choice is centered around self-sufficiency. They're bringing up their children, Méline and Jolane, in a spirit of freedom.
I was born in the southeast suburbs of Paris. I was interested in social work and became a children's counsellor, which I was passionate about. I gradually worked my way up to become head of a children's play centre. When I set up my first play centre, I had a fabulous team around me, and Olivier joined it a year later. That's how we met, and it was a wonderful meeting. Obviously. I used to look at the mad world around me. I used to think, who are all these people rushing about, going round in circles, getting up, going to work, coming back exhausted, and who can't take it anymore? Everyone tears strips off each other, bad-mouths each other. Something didn't seem right. I didn't see the point of having kids. But meeting Olivier rekindled my desire to have them. And so we thought we should try, and maybe we could work towards something better.
This is our little summer treat, actually. It's quite rare for us to be able to make sorbet. So we have the red berries from the garden, raspberries and black currants, which we put in the freezer. And then with this machine, we can quickly mix them together with sugar and egg white to make a sorbet, an instant sorbet.
Sorbet minute, voilà.
Our way of doing things came about gradually as the children came along. We realised that we had to do things differently. Giving birth, breastfeeding, what we ate. We had lots of ideas which we talked about, and we really wanted to go back to some basic values, which led us, little by little, to an overall ecological way of life. What really triggered our desire to change things around was realising that we would come home in the evening and we would have no time for each other or for the children. We were being paid to educate other people's children, but we were paying for other people to bring up our own children for 3/4 of the day. That's exactly how it worked.
It doesn't make sense.
You're right, it didn't make sense. I said it plenty of times because it's true. I was paying for a house which I hardly spent any time in because we used to work a lot. Sometimes we'd have 12-hour shifts. And we wouldn't even get to go home. It was just crazy. You start asking yourself, what is this way of life? We weren't making the most of each other or making the most of life. We were working but had no money. We had debts, we were overdrawn, and we hardly had enough to be able to go on holiday. We'd say, what sort of life is this? What's the point of it all? What does it mean? We both said that it just wasn't possible. We didn't want to live like that. So we started looking into things. We found that there were other ways of existing, and other people were thinking the very same things and trying new things out. Jolan was only just 2 years old, and we decided that we'd talked enough about it. We'd done enough research. It was now time to make our dreams reality. We couldn't face another bill. We wanted to have the time to enjoy our lives. So that meant reducing our needs to an absolute minimum so that we could have time to make the most of our life. We met Patrick and Brigitte, which gave us a huge boost. And we realized that it was totally possible to have an alternative way of life. And we thought, wow, that's great. We could even create a collective.
Just like Tara, Christelle, and Olivier, Cécile wanted to pursue her activities locally.
So the question we wanted to ask you is this. What do you understand by the term conscious or non-violent communication?
When Cécile moved in, she decided to use her skills for the good of the community. Brigitte and Patrick's objective was to transmit their ideas. This mission has today become the solid base on which the collective is built.
And now we're going to look at the whole area, the whole continent of relationships.
We both work. We've recreated our jobs here. I'm a facilitator in non-violent communication, and I've recently started running courses in human permaculture. Olivier deals with everything to do with energy, solar water heaters, and self-sufficient equipment.
So where are we now?
So this is the Hamlet's communal electrical room. The self-sufficient house has its own system thanks to the wind turbine, the solar panels, and battery banks. When we arrived 5 years ago, electricity wasn't installed on the property. So we created sustainable electricity after having had an estimate for the work from the French Electricity Board. They offered to install power and a meter for 12,000 euros, of which they would pay half. So for 6,000 euros, we could have had electricity right up to our front gate. But we decided to turn them down and tell them that we didn't want their price. And so we invested 12,000 euros in a sustainable electricity system. So in the end, we built our own self-sufficient system, which automatically paid for itself, because now we don't have a meter or a subscription. We don't pay for energy whatsoever. Our system is completely solar-powered. We have a bank of photovoltaic panels which can be regulated. The regulator is connected to the batteries, and it transmits solar power or not, depending on how much energy is in the batteries. It's really simple to use, and everything is controlled by this counter. At any moment, you can check what's happening. So, for example, now it's cloudy outside. It's the end of the day, so we're only getting in 60 watts, but we've accumulated 3.28 kilowatt hours over the whole day. So in comparison to what we've used in electricity, we actually have a surplus energy-wise.
Water, food, energy, health. The principles of self-sufficiency are well ingrained at every level of family life. Since they wanted to bring up their children in line with their own ambitions, Olivier and Cécile decided to follow their principles to the full by taking on the sole responsibility for the education of Méline and Jolan. They have absolutely no contact with school, whereas their friend Maya, who has come to visit, is still within the traditional school system. So you share this room, do you?
Yeah, I sleep in the bed at the top.
They're not beds, they're more like cabins.
Yes, we've made little cabins so that we can really hide away.
Jolan's first year at primary school was a difficult one. We noticed how much he changed during the year. He was much less enthusiastic and spontaneous. Normally children are always playing, and he'd always been such a happy child since birth, which had thrilled us. We'd invested so much in him since he was born. I would read him stories, we would sing songs, recite poems. It was a big part of our life. So going to school was dreadful for him, really horrible, and he'd have fits of anger. We couldn't go on. We couldn't see our child no longer enjoy reading or writing. It just wasn't on. It was impossible to go on like that. Reading and writing are how we communicate. So we said to him that we knew that there was a network of homeschooling in the area and that lots of people had homeschooling, so we suggested meeting them. One by one, while he was at school, we met the families, first by themselves, then as a group. Seeing all these children not going to school and learning in a different way, not being forced to sit behind a desk all day to work and learn, changed everything. Suddenly, Jolan and Méline came out and said that they'd had enough and didn't want to go to school anymore.
She could see that we didn't enjoy going to school anymore. She could see there was a problem. So she took us out of school.
She managed to get us out of school, and then she found the homeschooling network, which had about 30 families. She bought books. She bought all these and made these shelves. And she bought a homeschooling cupboard.
It was the end of August, beginning of September, and we wrote a formal letter to the National Education Department saying that we were going to be homeschooling our children.
You just write a letter to the Ministry of Education and tell them our children will no longer be attending school?
Yes, because the law says that you are legally obliged to educate your children, but it's not a legal obligation to send them to school. Schools are just one form of providing education, but there are other ways of doing it, including homeschooling.
Great dressing gown.
I like learning to be a game, in fact, because in the end, learning can be all about having fun. Méline realises that, especially for calculations. When we're building something, we have to know how to multiply, how to measure, how to calculate, like when you're cutting wood. So this is part of her everyday life with all the building we do. She loves watching all the building work, and so multiplication is part of her life, constructing things, making things that we need for every day. That gives the learning meaning.
Okay, it's my turn. Mummy, in the enemy's family, I'd like you to give me the woodpecker.
I've got it. Shall I read it to you?
Yes.
When the woodpecker is very hungry, she uses her strong beak to make a hole in the beehive. Then, with her long, sticky tongue, she swallows up the bees. We've got one, haven't we? Not far away.
What's the best thing and the worst thing about going to school or staying here?
When you don't go to school, you don't meet many of your friends. You can't make lots and lots of friends.
That's what you like about school. But Méline went, ah!
Well, I was scared like you about homeschooling, that I wouldn't see any friends. But when I started, I saw millions of people.
No, but at least 150 or 300.
Loads, it depends. Nobody's counted how many.
There's so many you can't even count them? Méline and Jolan have bad memories from their experiences at school. But today, they seem happy and fulfilled in this way of life, where everyone can learn and make progress at their own pace. They're always keen to learn new things. So she said you lift it up and they're underneath. Have you ever picked potatoes?
Never.
Nor me. It's going to be fun. Ah! Méline! Potato! Show me.
Oh, a potato. And another one.
Wow, a good harvest.
Loads. It's the first time I've picked any.
But the work's not finished. We have to cook them now, don't we?
Yes.
Let's go. Not far away from Méline and Jolan's yurt is where Tara's small house made of earth and straw can be found. As a young architecture student from the Alps region, she was destined for another future. But her strong desire to reconnect with nature brought her here, to the eco-village, 5 years ago.
For the first part of my life, I just accepted how things should be done. I didn't really think about it. People explained how concrete worked, and since I liked following methods, I would repeat, that's how concrete works, and that's how structures work, because I wanted to do things right, in a rather academic way. And then when I saw houses made of earth and straw, I was like, wow, how do they do that? I was quite wary. It was almost as if I was intimidated by people doing that. I found out that in concrete, when you take into account all the paint and the glue, and then I read that the air inside our houses is even more polluted than the air outside. One of the areas that produces the most waste is the construction industry. So being an architect, involved in building houses, which were not only polluted inside, but contributed to polluting the environment outside, made me stop and think about it all. I started to use eco-friendly paint and to get interested in alternative energy sources. I was working in Noirmoutier, on the west coast of France. And above all, I could see the astronomical sums spent on building homes. Somewhere inside me, an idea was sown, since my needs are fairly modest. And I dreamt of having a small, simple place to live in, something basic. And so I helped out on some collaborative construction sites for those building their own homes. It was a good lesson in humility, because even though I'd been to architecture school and worked in a firm, I realized I had to learn from scratch. I helped in the building of this house, in all the stages of construction from the beginning, but I didn't realize I was actually going to live in it. I did it to lend a helping hand. But also because I was really interested in building something so basic.
I'm making sure that these are really stones and not just little lumps of clay.
What are you two doing?
Making slurry.
Clay soil mixed with water.
You spread it on in a circular movement.
And then one day, I realized what self-sufficiency was. Something clicked. I'd understood on an intellectual level, but something happened physically. And I thought to myself, wow, living here is like living on a boat. You're open to the wind, the water, the sun, nature. And you're permanently interacting with all these elements. I loved it. It was an emotional thing. Self-sufficiency is not just a life experience, sharing with others, but also for me about accepting that I depend on water, air, nature, the sun, and how they interrelate, and how I look after them. Even talking about it moves me enormously. I can feel how much it all means to me. I really do. I didn't realize. I didn't know that life could be like this.
The visitors have all gone home now, with the firm desire to do what they can to change their own lives. Whether it starts off a radical change of life or simply brings them new ways of doing things, being immersed in a simple, common-sense way of life will help them to understand that another world is possible. The residents of the eco-village are both inventive and visionary, living proof that there is a sustainable future for humans on the planet. They have taken back control of their lives. I've been genuinely moved by meeting all these people, and it's convinced me that this way of life can be replicated. So I'm leaving the eco-village and setting out on a new path for a new destination.